Inflation has soared past 17%. People are dying while waiting in long queues for fuel, and authorities are scrapping school exams after running out of dollars to import paper and ink. Sri Lanka is going through its worst economic crisis since its independence, and the ripples are now being felt in India too. Driven out by hunger and loss of jobs, people from the island nation are seeking refuge in India, which is doing its best to help the neighboring country. India has extended financial assistance to the tune of $2.4 billion in the last 3 months to Sri Lanka, which includes a $400 billion RBI currency swap, deferral of a $500 million loan, and a $1.5 billion credit line for importing fuel, food, and medicines. In addition to an International Monetary Fund bailout, the southern neighbor has sought credit support of $2.5 billion from China. The island has been facing daily power cuts and double-digit inflation, which hit 17.5% in February. The Sri Lankan central bank allowed the local currency to devalue by 30% in a month. The crisis has been mainly caused by a shortage of foreign exchange reserves. They have plummeted 70% in 2 years to just $2 billion at the end of February, which can barely cover 2 months of imports. Meanwhile, the country has foreign debt obligations of about $7 billion this year. The forex crisis is the result of several factors. Tourism, which is the country's third largest foreign exchange earner, came to a virtual halt after the 2019 Easter Sunday suicide bombings, which killed more than 250 people. Tourist arrivals dropped by as much as 70%, and then the pandemic struck, dealing a severe blow to the tourism industry. And remittances from foreign workers, which is the nation's biggest source of dollars, slumped 22.7% to $5.5 billion in 2021. The country's heavy dependence on imports for essential goods like sugar, pharmaceuticals, fuel, pulses, and cereals worsened the crisis. The government's ban on chemical fertilizers last April, as it looked to become the first country to fully adopt organic farming, backfired. A survey showed that 90% of Sri Lanka's farmers used chemical fertilizers for cultivation. The move led to a drastic drop in domestic food production, pushing up food prices. The decision was rolled back after months of mass protests by farmers, but the damage was done. Food inflation soared to 25.7% in February. The crisis is now starting to impact Indian exporters. Thousands of containers sent from India to Sri Lanka, including for its own consumption as well as transshipment cargo, have been lying uncleared at the Colombo Port, as authorities can't afford to transfer containers between terminals. This in turn has led to some buildup of cargo intended for Sri Lanka at Indian ports. India also relies considerably on Colombo Port for global trade, given it is a transshipment hub. 60% of India's transshipment cargo is handled by the port. India-linked cargo in turn accounts for 70% of Colombo Port's total transshipment volume.
Primary issue. Some of the shippers are not ready to accept payment in Indian rupee. They want USDs only. Even the credit line extended by India, which has not yielded a result as of now. 1,500 containers is stuck at the Sri Lankan port, which already imported. It needs to be taken at a priority level. How best the payment terms is being adjusted. There are 3 terminals inside the port. This container has to be transshipped to the next terminal. Minimum is 8 kilometers distance between the terminals. The non-availability of fuel may result the outsourcing company to demand more money. Number 2, Port City is 100% is a labor-oriented port. If the food prices escalate, there is an forecasted unrest will come. It's a big problem for us.
India has traditionally been among Sri Lanka's largest trade partners. Prior to the pandemic, India was the top tourism source for Sri Lanka. More than 1/5 of Sri Lanka's total imports come from India. India is also one of the largest contributors to FDI in Sri Lanka. FDI from India amounted to about $1.7 billion from 2005 to 2019. After China and the UK, India was the biggest source of FDI for Sri Lanka in 2019 at $139 million. The main investments from India are in the areas of petroleum retail, tourism and hotel, manufacturing, real estate, telecommunication, banking, and financial services. A number of leading companies from India have invested and established their presence in Sri Lanka. These include Indian Oil, Airtel, Taj Hotels, Dabur, Ashok Leyland, Tata Communications, Asian Paints, SBI, and ICICI Bank.
I would say that the situation is now definitely on the mend. It is improving. And once the flow of tourism, the flow of remittances also starts coming back, then I think the situation will improve much further. And I would say that the support of the Indian government has been extremely important, and it has really infused a lot of confidence and a lot of enthusiasm among Indian businesses as well. And I would say that, in fact, this is actually opening new doors for Indian businesses in Sri Lanka. In fact, recently we found that the hotels in Colombo are actually quite packed. The flights are also seeing very good occupancy. So I think there is a lot of interest right now from Indian industry in doing business with Sri Lanka. I think Sri Lanka is now looking more at sourcing from India because Indian goods are not only more competitive at this current point of time, and I think the Sri Lankan government is also keen to remove some of the trade barriers and to encourage more investments from India. So they have looked at infrastructure investments, energy investments. There may be some few drawbacks to the current situation, but they are very temporary.
Although Sri Lanka holds minor importance to India in terms of trade, it is a geopolitically important country and India needs to counter the growing Chinese influence on its economy. At $4.8 billion, India's annual exports to Sri Lanka accounted for just 1.3% of India's total exports. Sri Lanka's share in India's total imports was just 0.16%. However, any disruption in Colombo Port operations makes India vulnerable to an increase in costs and congestion issues. While the work on building a transshipment hub in Kerala has begun, it is in India's interest to help Sri Lanka come out of the crisis in the short term.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.